And I think with Crashlands 2, as we started to develop out the tools and imagine what we wanted it to be, we were like, yeah, we could figure out a way to make this hand built to make the content scale.
Yeah.
We're good. Go ahead.
You go.
No, you.
No, you go.
Butterscotch. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 379 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth, and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, and I'm the web programmer.
I'm Sam, and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today's August 23rd, 2020. Before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be cursing. Just torrents of curses.
Torrents.
Just blasting out of your speakers.
As if there was a drought of curses, and now there's a heavy downpour of curses.
Just a torrential downpour.
Sort of a flash flood of cursing.
This reminds me when Sam and I were on the Favreau video podcast, and at the beginning we double check with them. We're like, all right, we want to make sure it's okay if, we're using profanity, like we don't do anything gross, but just like, it's just casual, And they were like, oh yeah, and I was like, we made a big deal about it. And I'm pretty sure we didn't say
we just swear the entire
single cuss word the whole time. And I was like, that feels like we did something bad here.
I think.
If you're gonna lead in with it, you gotta cash in on the promise.
Yeah.
I think it's good to set up an environment in which it's possible.
That's true.
If you don't make use.
Yeah, it keeps everybody on edge because they're like, it's coming. When's it coming?
The
never
timer's counting down now. Yeah, we've got 2 minutes left. When's?
You know how there's a lot of movies that have like jump scares and stuff like that where okay, Final Destination, I think is the first one. Mm-hmm. Did such a great job of this.
Oh yeah.
Where as soon as they establish the premise that everybody in this movie is going to just die, just like kind of in the most random weird ways.
Yep.
Then every single thing that you see is suspect.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the scene where there's the woman in the bathroom and she starts to brush her teeth. And I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck is going to happen? Like, how is she going to be killed by a toothbrush, And then nothing happens, right?
Yep.
And she puts, and then eventually I think she ends up getting like strangled by like a shower cord or something.
Yeah. That's really weird.
In like the most elaborate way possible. But what that kind of made me think of was like, I want to see a movie where it always seems like something really bad is about to happen, and it just never, ever does.
Tension building, or you got the shots that are close in with like, oh, it's getting kind of eerie, and then it's just, you're done.
Yeah, like somebody gets home from work and they like turn on, it's dark and they try to turn the light on and the light won't turn on and there's like, creepy music and they're like, hello? And they just hear creaking in the house and stuff. And then eventually they just go to bed and it's fine.
I mean, in a way, it's kind of what the Blair Witch Project was, right?
Yeah.
Because nothing really happened, actually. It was just like some people freaked out in the woods and they were like talking about scary stuff, right? And there were like some noises and things, right?
Yeah, but that's why it's so good, right? Because like this, it's all about the suspense. Once you actually know what the monster is, this is like the game Fear. You guys remember those games?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, as soon as you give the protagonist a gun and you can just start shooting the monsters, it's like, all right, this isn't really scary anymore, right?
Yep.
Like when I'm defenseless and I don't know what's about to happen to me, then it's horrifying. Mm-hmm. But once I know exactly what I'm dealing with and I've got a gun to shoot it,
different story.
Then
I think it depends
it's just a problem to solve.
It depends on the thing, right? Because I think because that's how I feel about like Doom, right? It's like these grotesque, like horrible monsters, right? But I don't actually find it scary, right? Although was it Doom 3?
There's some jump scares.
There was the one where it's like all dark and that was.
Oh, we are so desensitized. Like the shit that we do in like Back for Blood, like fighting the zombie kaiju and like
there's no
blood and gore everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
But when I played I think it was the original Fear. And I remember like even like of ways into the game, I was like going through this like office, like open office plan space, and there's like little partial dividers up and chairs everywhere. And that fucking little creepy girl, right? Like her head pops up like off in the distance and it's like dark in here. It's like, I know she's there and I know she's seen me, but then she's like gone again. Right. And then I like moving through and I see her like suddenly like on all fours juke across, like the hallway as I'm coming through. So I know she's up there. But if that was like if that was like a monster I'd seen a bunch of times and fought, then I'd be like, oh, I'd be thinking about strategy, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's this like creepy ghost thing that you don't really even fight, I don't think, as I remember anyway. It's just there to make you uncertain about what's going to happen. Because I think that's the thing that you lose. Because I think you're right. But I don't think it's about the gun. I think it's about once you get to fight something, right?
Yeah.
Right. But if you never get to fight it, and I think that's also like Fear 2, I want to say, which I only played like the beginning of the demo of, and I was like, this is too much for me. But like you're walking through the hallway, there's like these lockers on all sides.
Oh yeah.
And all of a sudden they come like blowing open as if like something has sped past you, right? Mm. And then all of a sudden, like there's like an intersection in the hallways up ahead, and then all of a sudden the pile of things just gets flung to the side, and you have no idea what it is that's doing this if you can fight it. Like what it's going to do when you get there. Yeah. And so while it's all unknown, and I'm loaded up with like this machine gun and like grenades and stuff, right? But like, I don't even know what those are going to do, Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like that, I think it's the moment you get to fight a thing. I think that's when in movies it's the moment you see it, but I think in video games it's the moment you get to fight it. Because I think that's also why Amnesia for me worked pretty well in terms of like being scary because you don't fight stuff, right? And so you see it, but that didn't actually take the spookiness and scariness away from me because. Sure, I saw it, but I don't know what that means.
You still can't handle it, right?
I can't. And as soon as it gets to you, you're dead.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's kind of it's difficult to suspend disbelief in scenarios like when you look across the room and suddenly like this spooky little girl is over there, right? And then suddenly she's gone again because it's why? Like, why would this spooky girl appear and then disappear? Like that, there's no explanation other than to scare me.
But that's right, which is scary because that means she defies the laws of reality. She can do anything. You don't know.
But what's
her
motivation?
But that's the core mystery.
Her motivation is to fuck with you, which is the scariest thing. She's a being, as far as we can tell,
a ghost,
omnipotent being because she can just control reality, right? And she's fucking with you right now, right? She's playing. She's playing like she's toying with you the way that like a cat toys with a grasshopper or a mouse before it tries to kill it, right? Like you didn't know what she's doing. You don't know her motivations. All you know is that she's basically a god and she's presented herself to you in the freakiest way possible, right? And so like she's up to no good.
But also that whenever she wants to kill you, she just will. And so you may as well just carry on with your day.
You may as well. Yeah. But that doesn't change.
Nothing they do is going to matter. Yeah, so just whistle and carry on.
Yeah, but that's like if you're in an airplane where you're like, well, if this crashed, like, that's it. So I should just not worry about it, right? And that is like the logical path to go down, definitely. But that's not how, emotional responses to things work. Because those aren't yoked to your reason. They just do whatever the fuck they want. So you can think about that as much as you want. You can think like, I'm in a video game. It doesn't make any sense that this ghost girl is doing this. Like this was a designed experience. They're trying to like cause some. You can think all of that stuff, and if you do it aggressively enough, you can start to tone down your emotional responses, right?
Yeah,
but you can't just remove it. It's just not good. It's not intentionally, but it can fade with time and exposure.
That's true.
But I haven't exposed myself to that many creepy.
I kind of want to go back and play those games again because I never beat any of them.
I think we should play that Phasmophobia or whatever.
The multiplayer one. We
should actually play that.
The ghost hunting one?
Yeah. Okay. That was actually scary as shit.
Let's do it, and then we'll do a nail whiff about it.
We should let's do it.
Anyway, also, I didn't get to this part. We'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thanks, guys, gals, for letting us grab your money. We appreciate it quite a bit. All right, now I got a couple things to talk about before we get into questions. One is this is a prime number episode. Nice. Ooh. Episode 379. That's all I want to say about that.
Let's encrypt something with this number.
Yeah, let's make an NFT out of it.
Yeah.
Can we do that? It has to be a prime number, I think.
No, you can work. No, I just made that number. The number can be any number, so it's fine. But we can use it part of the cryptography for the NFT. We should actually make a new blockchain that uses the prime numbers of our podcast as the encryption key.
Yeah.
That's what we should do.
Also, let's make an NFT of the number 379.
Yeah.
And then start talking on Twitter about how we own that number because we don't understand anything.
Do you
do
remember
that.
when the NFT for colors came out and
No.
they were taking just like hex colors, right?
I mean, that's just as dumb as any other NFT.
But it was like,
good.
but it was so funny because the motivation was the guy was like, no, listen. He's like, think about it. You can
hear me out.
You can so you can just go like take a color. It was the idea was this was for artists, I guess. I don't know. But he's like, so you can just go take a color, right? You could be like, this is my color, and if people want to use it, they have to basically pay me a royalty because they use it by like talking to the blockchain to like see whose it is or whatever. Right?
Yeah, it's not how NFTs work.
And,
That's not how that works.
And
But
so,
carry on.
so then they do that, and then now all of a sudden we can have this marketplace where like you can own colors, and anybody who wants to use them that ends up paying you, right? But earnestly, at least it seemed, thinking that people would opt into this on the payment side because you don't own the color. You know, that's not how anything works.
Yeah.
So you would have to just opt into.
I want to use red.
So that
Who
now I'm
owns
going to pay
red?
this.
I'm going to
guy,
make sure
you know?
I pay them.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the weirdest.
Even though I'm free to just use it, I
Yeah.
would need to just for safety, I'll go and just pay this random person.
I think that was
on
my
NFT.
favorite NFT scam.
I mean, if
of
we
all
ever
of them.
need, investment capital, we could always just like launch the second season of the podcast on the blockchain or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Actually, I saw Will Wright. I think just announced Will Wright, the Sims guy, right? I think the maker of the Sims.
Yeah.
The 2 games that he's working on, they just got a bunch of funding to put them on the blockchain for some reason. And I'm like, Will.
What do you mean?
Fallen
What do you
so
put them on the
far.
block? What do you mean put them
I
on the
don't know.
block?
He
Like,
doesn't
what
know
are you
what he means by that.
Will,
He's just,
stop
he's
it.
just on the hype train.
You were a legend. Why?
If you want to hear some wild shit, there's a Freakonomics. I think it's 3 episodes about cryptocurrency and NFTs and stuff. And it's a little infuriating because I can tell that the hosts of the show do understand that this is all nonsense, but they needed to make 3 episodes out of it. And so they keep like talking to all these people who are working with NFTs and crypto and stuff. And they're kind of like asking them genuine questions and they're not, directly calling them out on their answers because that would kind of like kill the interviews,
It's hard.
So unfortunately they gave them a lot of space
Yeah.
to kind of to bloviate about how amazing these new technologies are and how they're going to enable so many new things. We don't know what they're going to enable still after
it's all going to be
this time.
expensive, whatever it is.
Yeah. Really at its core, they've definitely enabled tons of new ways to scam people. It's incredible. The innovations in scamming technology are just astronomical these days. It's a whole new world. But
I think it
anyways.
used to be like it always gets harder to scam people along certain dimensions, So like that's why you got to keep these new scam industries.
You got to keep it hot and fresh.
alive, yeah.
Yeah. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about, which is just this interesting thing that happened the other day, which was we had an episode of Turbo Rain. Okay. I want to talk about the weather. So, I was looking outside. It's like kind of sunny, but it kind of has like this feel that it's going to rain.
It's just a little spooky, a little off.
Yeah, and so I'm like, I feel like it's gonna rain, and then I look at my phone. I go to the weather app or whatever, and it's like weather app's like, nah, bro, it's not gonna rain. Everything's fine. 0% chance. Get over yourself. And I'm like, geez, okay. So I put my phone away, and then about 2 minutes later, all of a sudden, it starts raining just instantly, harder than I've ever fucking seen in my entire life. Okay. But the sun is out, and the sunlight was refracting through the water in a way that basically made it look like it was just like a white glowing, like plasma wall out of my window. I couldn't see across the street. I couldn't see anything because it was just, and like the light coming in through the window was so diffuse that everything in the house took on this like weird kind of like ethereal kind of glowing like quality. It was bonkers. Okay. So it rained like this for like 3 minutes and then it just instantly stopped.
The way you're describing this makes me wonder because you know Thor's Bifrost situation.
I
I don't.
seeing through like Is the Bifrost is like the portal, then they can
It's
like
the
shoot
portal
through
thing.
it.
Yeah, but they like when it comes down, it's just like a big beam of light,
Yeah.
which is essentially what you're describing. And I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Hear me out.
This one was just more wet than
Yeah,
what
well,
they
that's what I'm
showed
wondering.
in the
I'm
movies,
wondering if you had some sort of alien encounter or other sort of parallel dimension shifting situation happen, the byproduct of which was just that things were wet now, but actually what you were, it was sort of your brain interpreting because the eerie glow inside the house. I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's spooky. Or
Well,
it actually
through the
was.
windows, you know?
It actually just may have been the Bifrost, but global warming, so it melted, right? Now it's just the by water.
It's by rain.
It's just
By rain.
just torrential downpour. It's probably that's probably what happened.
Yeah.
But I mean, the cool thing about this was immediately after then, this storm, I don't know what to call this, this downpour, it passed really quickly. And so then we were able to look off afterwards, just like walk outside and just look off in the distance and just see this just brightest fucking rainbow I've ever seen. Because the water was so thick, awesome. Just off in the distance. Mm-hmm. So, that was pretty cool. But this is happening more and more all over the place. We're just like all of a sudden, just torrential downpour in a place that just hasn't had any rain in a long time. Whereas like in the past, it would be like, oh yeah, like it's rainy this week. And there's like 3 or 4 days where it's just kind of raining a bit. Right. And what happens now is instead
we
you
still
just
have
get,
that. We just now also have this.
Yeah. There's like all of a sudden you just get punched by rain. And so like, I guess in Texas, just yesterday or a few days ago, it's just like all of a sudden they got like an entire summer's worth of rain in one day and just flooding everywhere. Like we had that in St. Louis 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, the whole 13 inches of rain. There was
like 13 inches of rain in like 6 hours. Like what the hell, man?
It's
crazy.
When I was living in Dallas, I was driving one day when we got hit with one of these, and it wasn't as intense as the one you're describing, but it was still like you couldn't see, kind of stuff middle of the day, otherwise perfectly bright. And so I'm just like, fortunately I was driving in a residential area, so I could just kind of like pull over and stop, but I like to put my brights on and like was holding the parking brake down. So it'd be like, please see lights, cause like it was just, but it was the same day where it was just perfectly bright outside. All of a sudden I couldn't see for like a few minutes and then it was gone.
It's pretty spectacular.
And but then it was also cause it's in, Dallas. So like you just live on concrete there. It's just a big flat piece of concrete.
Oh yeah.
And the dry as fuck ground, which doesn't soak up water. Like you'd think that dry ground would just like soak up the water, but no, it does not. It absolutely
it's hard packed.
It just runs right off of it. So then all of a sudden it was like just the road was like 6 inches of water, And so then I just sat there for a while longer to just kind of let the water recede because then it was like falling into drains and stuff, right? But as I was getting back home, like every little dip, it was like I was like, oh no, am I going to be stuck in this? Because it was like so much water just everywhere. But it was that same thing, just this brief like.
It's a new
just give me one of those. I think this is 6 inches deep, but it's actually 6 feet deep kinds of situations.
Oh, yeah, don't fuck with water. I think it's always a good thing to remember.
Yeah, although I do love videos of people who are like, I'm going to drive right through this. And then they try to drive their truck or something through like 4 feet deep of water, and then it just ends up floating. Yeah. Not driving through that, buddy. Anyways, let's get on to some questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. If you'd like to get your question onto a future episode, go there and ask it. Highest upvoted question comes from Zivix, who says, can you hoard ceilings? If you remove a ceiling from a home, is it still a ceiling? So this is a kind of a philosophical question. So so the first part of the question.
I don't even understand the first
Can you hoard ceilings? All right. So for starters, I guess
ceiling?
What is a ceiling and what would it mean to have a bunch of them? Right? Because the hoarding is like you've got a bunch of stuff.
Well, hoarding is specifically, it's not just having a bunch, it's having a bunch at the expense of other people having it, right? That means that you having a ceiling takes a ceiling away from somebody else.
Well, unless we're talking about in the hoarder sense, where you've got like, you just never get rid of any
ceilings. Yeah.
So in that scenario, you would need to have sort of like leftover old ceilings that nobody wants, right? And nobody needs, and you don't need, but you're holding on to them just because that's what you do.
But I think if you got to answer the question of what a ceiling actually is, though, right? Because can you hoard it in the first place? And I think a ceiling would just be.
It's a wall that doesn't give a fuck about gravity, I think is what a ceiling is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the top of a room. Like, does the International Space Station have ceilings?
Or does it only have floors? Or does it only have walls? I think it only has walls.
I think it only has walls. Yeah.
It only has walls, but also the astronauts do tend to orient themselves in the same way.
That's just so they can talk to each other without somebody being upside down.
Yeah.
You know?
They tend to treat one side, like one wall of the space station as the floor.
Yeah.
And they treat the other as a ceiling, but also they can just go to the ceiling at any time.
Yeah, it's just
and
for
now
convenience.
that's just another floor.
So the question basically would be, before you've put a surface up there, is it a ceiling? So if you need to install a ceiling, is it a ceiling pre-installation while it's sort of, you could collect the parts in them?
I don't think so.
But
It's just drywall, or it's just some tiles, or
So ceiling is just a concept, basically.
A ceiling is a social construct.
Okay.
Well, it's also a completed real construct. It's both at the same time. The social construct is where we draw
literally.
the lines. That's what I mean. Yeah, yeah. But it's also like what we decide the boundaries, because social constructs are either largely or completely made up, even if they have real impacts, right? Or it's about where's the line drawn between how we're trying to categorize things. And anytime we're trying to categorize anything, there's no definition that just works universally, right?
Yeah.
Which is just a fact how the world works. The world is an actually interesting place. So if it was
It's
easy
a little
just
fuzzy.
to be like, this is that and that's that, then that's boring. No, we don't want that. And so I think a ceiling is, it's the same deal. Because like you can start getting fucking weird with it. You get into like, those big church things where like the wall just starts to bend, and then eventually comes to a point. Is the ceiling just the tip,
Or does it have no ceiling?
Does it have no ceiling?
Is it a room with 3 walls? Or I guess with like a floor and 2 walls.
Here's a question.
If
you're the shorter you are, is there more ceiling? If ceiling's kind of like the space up there that you can't.
Is it
really
the space or is it the surface?
Well, if it's the surface up there that you can't really interact with, if
Well, it depends.
Because then parts of
if
the
it's-
walls are out of your reach.
Exactly.
And so now that's the
that would be like a
ceiling,
Gothic cathedral, right? Where it's actually just a wall all the way up. But
As
at some
soon as
point, you're like, that's the ceiling now.
Yeah, once you can't
Because
reach it.
Once you can't.
But then that would also mean that a low ceiling becomes a wall now, which is how it feels, actually.
that is true. Yeah.
You feel
That's
really
when people
walled
say
in.
the walls are closing in.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't feel ceilinged in. No one ever says that. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, or floored, really. Well, you can be floored.
You can be floored.
Yeah.
But that's about being
means-
knocked sort of
Onto the floor.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing about ceilings is they're generally non-interactable. You're not like, oh, I fell right onto the ceiling, Or
Ceilings
you
are
can-
about
I
limits,
guess you could,
right? Because you're like, I really hit the ceiling on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but really the ceiling is just the bottom of the next floor.
Sometimes, but not always.
Sometimes it's the bottom of the
if there
roof.
is a next floor.
Yeah.
Now, can you hoard them? I think this is just a definitions problem, because if hoarding something is just having a lot of it, then you can definitely hoard ceilings by building a skyscraper.
Or, hoarding properties, which is, a real problem, because now you've also got all those ceilings in there from all those properties you hoarded.
Yep.
So, but I think they come along for the ride when you're hoarding something else, though. I don't think you can hoard them specifically, because even if you stacked a bunch of ceilings on top of each other, just like literally on top of each other, that's just one ceiling now.
Well, it's just one floor now, because
It depends on where it's at. Relative to you.
Are you stacking them on the ground, or are you?
I mean, like on top of each other, there's no space in between. That's just one ceiling now. And if you start to move them apart, then now you're making more floors. Now you got a skyscraper, right? Yeah. And so
If you just stack a bunch of ceilings, though, isn't it like a bunker at that point?
yeah, because
It's just a
because
thick
it's a really thick ceiling.
Oh, yeah.
But it is still
Yeah,
one
it's
ceiling.
just like a thick, juicy ceiling.
Yeah, so I think actually ceilings are sort of not only not hoardable, but sort of anti-hoardable, because the only way to create one is to create a space in which a ceiling belongs.
That's true.
Because
So
a
you can't have
ceiling
too few,
has to
you
have a
can't have
space
too many.
under it.
Yep. You can only have exactly enough.
Yeah.
So you can only have one ceiling per space.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can't hoard them, because they always are proportional to the space that they're in.
So you can hoard spaces, but you cannot hoard ceilings.
But what if you have like a loft? Because that's got like, you got like the major ceiling at the top, but then you got like the lofted areas.
Oh yeah,
ceiling
but there's always one ceiling like above any given space, right? Like if you move to another part of the loft, there might be a different ceiling for that part of the loft.
Does a trellis count?
Square footage wise?
Isn't a trellis a wall?
Like the
What's a trellis?
like the outdoor.
Like a pergola?
Is that what that is? It's pergola.
Pergola is the one with the slots on the top instead of actual.
That's what I'm thinking about. Yeah. So like if you got
Slots?
you got the posts, 4 posts, and then you got like the slotted beams across, maybe some vines.
Yeah, I've never really understood those things.
I think
Is
it's
it
that
a
the
ceiling?
wind doesn't rip them off the ground. I think is their purpose. But
Yeah,
Is it
I
a
don't
ceiling?
think that's no. That's just some horizontal boards.
yeah, it's
And
not,
I guess they're
it's not even
not
a
a floor.
floor. I would say
it's not a ceiling because you could just go right through that thing. You
Yeah.
know, like and things could come down through it as well very easily. So it's not really doing anything to block stuff.
But you can turn it into a ceiling just by covering the bottom of it.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah, but it isn't before that.
yeah. So I don't know.
So it's just outside.
Ceilings.
Because if it's just outside, then you're not short a ceiling. You can only have exactly the right number of ceilings. It's just
I think
not
you're right.
horrible.
Yep.
That's right.
There you go.
All right, next question comes from TimConceivable, who says, "Do you like cheese? What is your favorite kind?"
Yes, white cheddar or any kind of just very potent cheddar because I like to eat it with crackers.
I like a funky gooey cheese. Like I want it, especially if it's a goat milk cheese. There's like the goat funk, because it's got some kind of thing.
But
going on.
you're a runny eggs guy too, right?
Oh yeah. Give me flavor. Like the more flavor the better. Like runny eggs, it's just like fatty, delicious stuff. Because like eat those once you cook them up, it's like eating. You might as well just eat some yellow chalk. Doesn't taste like anything. It's dry as a bone. It just crumbles. It's horrible. But like get that nice gooey stuff. And so like a good funky cheese that when you smell it, you're a little bit concerned. Like that's
You're a little ill.
a little, not all the way to ill, but you're just like, this shouldn't be good because there's a bad smell here, right? Because then when you eat it and it is good, then it's like stinky tofu. It's the same deal, right? Like stinky tofu, you can smell that shit from a mile away, right? But people love it. So you're like, okay, it's got to be worth it somehow, right? Same deal with stinky cheese. And then you eat it and you're like, fuck, that is good, And
it seems like you're very risk tolerant when it comes to eating some of these things. Where it's like,
oh yeah,
this is suspiciously definitely not a good idea. Basically, based on some other senses that are happening.
yeah. But I base it on other
trust
people, right? Because if other people are like, this is the shit, right? Then if my senses are screaming at me and like, no, this is bad, I'm like, these are wrong then because other people are into it. It's gotta be something there, But like, I don't know, I just like having lots of stuff going on so it isn't boring, So you get like a good, because I don't like having to eat. So if I'm going to, let's make it an adventure, So like. So there's a cheese place here in St. Louis that every once in a while we go to because it's very expensive to get like the fancy stuff, right? But there's a real cheesemonger there, right? And he's like, there's like the case. You can ask him questions. He'll tell you about the history.
He's just monging.
He's monging the shit out of these cheeses. He knows everything about every single one, and he's like talking about each one. And he's asking us like kind of what we're into, and it like lets us taste different things. And like I love that whole experience because it's like, you're talking to a nerd who's really into the topic, right? And they're like trying to figure out how to give you a good experience based on what they're into and what they think you might be into. And the diversity of kinds of experiences you can have is just so enormous. And yeah, every once in a while I can bring something home. It's pretty stinky.
Not good.
It's like, eat it. I'm like, this is a little too off for my tastes. And I still give it an honest shot, keep on trying it because I'm always like, I almost always adapt, and then eventually like it. Every once in a while, that's not true. Every once in a while, it's just gross the whole time, right? But that's fine. That's part of the adventure. That's how you find the good stuff.
It just never gets better. Some things
No
get
risk,
better.
no reward.
That one didn't. So that time.
Yeah, and it is a no risk, no reward. I think it's like there have been a few cheeses that we found this way that were like one of those things where you're like, oh, this is why this is why there are cheese people, like you eat those few things and you're like, oh, this is just a different kind of experience actually. And so you don't get to have those if you don't stray into risky territory, So yes, I like funky wet cheese.
I like cheese, mozzarella specifically, because I found that you could slap mozzarella on just about anything, and it's great. Especially, I mean, particularly if you're heating it. If you're putting cold mozzarella on stuff, that's a harder sell, I feel.
Definitely.
Unless it's that one salad where, I guess, quote unquote salad, where it's just
once you get tomato and basil mixed in there, then you can do anything, you know.
It's like a bun in that context.
Yeah. But the thing that I've kind of learned about cheese is that, so because I kind of developed a lactose intolerance in my late 20s.
Same.
And, you know, a lot of cheeses don't really have a lot of lactose in them. And so you can get by eating some cheeses. You
Some
know,
do,
even if
though.
you've got this.
Yeah.
Some do. So you gotta know your stuff. But one thing I learned is that it is incredibly hard to avoid eating cheese in the United States.
It is.
Because it is in everything. And lactose is just in every dessert.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Because lactose is the sugar that is in milk, you know, and that's what makes milk have, you know, nearly the sugar content of like a Coca-Cola is the lactose.
Yeah.
So, and it's also why it's, you know, why milk is what, you know, babies consume, because it's incredibly calorie dense because of the lactose, because of the sugar in it, you know? And so like it's sweet, but that means as Americans, we love putting milk and everything, cream, cheese, whatever we can squeeze it in, we put it in there.
And I would say that is specific to like American food, right? Is like just that everything has cheese on it, you know? Because I mostly eat other cultural food, because I'm like at home I cook American food because that's like what I grew up with, right? So like when I go out to eat, I'm always trying to have other stuff, and it is the case actually that in lots of other contexts it's actually hard to find cheese, like as like parts of the food, right? But it is like every once in a while, because I don't go to just like straight up like American style restaurants very often. But every time I do, I always have that. I'm just like blown away that literally every single item is like this with cheese, this with cheese, this with like all the way down the bottom.
My wife refers to it as fat salt, because like how you put salt on everything and it just sort of makes stuff better. Cheese is basically fat salt, where it's like it's the same. It does the same thing. Where you just throw it in stuff and it's just somehow makes it a little bit good,
right?
You know,
because unlike butter, which like because it melts all the way, so then it doesn't really like stay there, but cheese will stay there, so it's like you still get the advantages of butter but without
and like melting a cheese like it gives like a gooey texture, and you know it's it's very easy to improve just about any recipe by just slamming some cheese into it.
Seth, if you like a gooey texture, you should try out runny eggs.
No, I don't like
another thing that makes everything better on just so cheese. Yeah, definitely. Runny egg yolk. Throw that shit on.
Well, that brings me to my next point, which is I'm trying to eat more vegan. So
you can have neither cheese nor egg yolks.
Yeah, cheese, eggs, butter, all that stuff. And something else that I'm learning then is
no honey.
Never mind. Like that stuff is in everything. Good luck. If you want to just go out to eat at just any restaurant in the US, almost no restaurant has a vegan option. They'll sometimes have a vegetarian option, but they will almost never have a vegan option, right? So if you want to eat vegan stuff, you've got to like go to a specifically vegan restaurant that they specifically, that's their thing that they do, or you just kind of put up with it and like eat something that has some cheese in it, or you know whatever. So that's been an interesting. You know, it very much has that like when people talk about the idea of privilege and how like when everything is targeted at you, you just don't really realize how much that's the case until you have to start viewing things from a lens that isn't about that, right? Yep. And so like when you're eating meat and dairy and eggs and cheese, you know, and all that stuff, then you go to a restaurant and you're just like, what do I want? Like I can have anything. I can have anything on this menu. It's all just looks amazing. And as soon as you come in there, if you've got like a gluten issue or if you're vegan or whatever, and you're like, what can I have? And then there's like a little corner down at the bottom, you know, where they're like, this might be vegan. We're not totally sure what that means, right? And you're like, all right, fine, I'll get that, right? And you just kind of realize, you know, just how much everything is engineered for a completely different mindset, you know, than what you're coming in there with. So, you know, it's just a little self-discovery journey. but that's okay. I'll still just eat. If I don't have a good option, I'll just get something that looks good, and it's okay if it's got whatever. Yeah. All right. Next question comes from Beekie Boppaboop, who says, "You said on episode 374 that the world of Crashlands 2 will be hand built. In my opinion, this seems great. I found the random generation and infiniteness of the original Crashlands to be cool, but not particularly interesting or necessary mechanically. I'm betting, however, that this was a tough decision. How did you come to the conclusion that handcrafting the world is the way to go?"
I mean, basically that same observation.
Yes.
It's cool, but not particularly interesting or necessary mechanically.
The question with OG Crashlands was the same question with Crashlands 2, which is not that we would prefer to have procedural generation, but that solves a whole bunch of content problems. So if it's really hard to create and manage content, including a hand-built map and all the things that take place on it, then it's conceptually more difficult to do procedural and have that like work out. But in terms of amount of work, it's much less, right? To get to a level of like, that's good enough, right? Versus like hand built, getting to a level good enough just takes way, way, way more. So it's, from what I recall from OG Crashlands and also discussion about Crashlands 2, it was really about, do we have any other choice, right? And I think with Crashlands 2, as we started to develop out the tools and imagine what we wanted it to be, we were like, yeah, we could figure out a way to make this hand built, to make the content scale.
Yeah.
We're good. Go ahead.
You go.
You
go.
All right. So it was really because of Levelhead that we realized that we would be able to make a world editor for Crashlands 2 that would be potent enough for us to actually just like build a handmade world. Because we didn't, the Crashlands creator that we used to make the custom campaign elements of the original game, that was in a web browser. Like Adam made a tool in a web browser for us to build out those outposts and stuff like that. And to be fair, that tool was pretty dope.
Yeah, especially given how little I knew and how bad I was at web programming at that time. I knew nothing.
Yeah.
It was pretty good.
Compared to the feedback loop and the visual clarity of editing stuff directly in the game, in an in-game editor, a web browser tool just doesn't hold a candle to that, right? And so if you're trying to build an entire world using a browser-based tool, I think it's going to be a lot more tedious and take a lot more time, Well,
it always depends on how the fidelity, right? Because like the fidelity of the original Crashlands creator was pretty low, right? Like it wasn't, like, because it would like upload all the tiles and like all the assets or the individual sprites of the things, but like you don't see things animated. It's not quite the right scale, right? It's not overlapping exactly the right way. And we did that because we had so much stuff to do already, like on the game programming side, that diverting Seth to building like tooling on top of the game stuff just did not seem feasible.
Too much.
And so we're like, okay, well, as a sort of second best option, like I can make an editor in a different context where I know the tech, and it won't be the same, but as long as it's close enough that as you're building stuff, you can like grok it, then, it's fine. And I think that was true when you're building like these one-off, like small things like we did in original Crashlands. But for building like an entire world, I think it's always low fidelity.
Yeah. The difference to me is a framing one in terms of the intent with Crashlands 2 for how the world fits into the gameplay, which is that in the original, it's almost like you think about the ocean, which is if you're sailing on the ocean, there's kind of nothing going on, and then there's an island, and then that's what's might be of interest or whatever else. But that the moment to moment stuff is kind of just the same here and there, but you need all that sea to have the islands poke out and be of interest, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you get with procedural generation. That's what actually the model kind of ended up being, which is you are walking between actually interesting locations, but the world itself doesn't have naturally interesting stuff going on. So Crashlands 2, I think, is much more aimed at being something more akin to almost like a national park or something like that, where it's like everywhere you're going, any individual trail you're on is interesting by virtue of its own stuff, and you are heading to these interesting locations, right?
Yeah.
And that shift in intended frame means that players can find, you're constantly finding areas that have a sort of a bend to them, like a bit of an identity to them, even if they're using the same mix of parts basically that you would see in other parts of the world. It's a unique blend in any given one place, in the same way that if you're on a hike or something like that, you might come across a place where there's just like a bunch of one particular kind of tree for some reason. And it just, it's cool. It looks cool. You remember it because it sticks out.
It feels like there's a reason, It feels like the history happened in such a way that this ended up this way,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's much more angled at that side of things, which is how do you turn it from being, okay, you're on a raft at sea and the only interesting parts are be sort of few and far between, to basically saying that everything is interesting. And you can't do that with procedural generation, I guess, is the short version. Because as soon as we try to do that, get into that stuff with procedural, then it's like, well, you start seeing the pattern again somewhere else.
Something that we kept running into with the procedural generation was we always had this desire to have areas come out of it, like an area that, like Sam said, has a unique identity, where we'd say we really want this kind of a resource to appear in clusters, right? We want there to be like an area where there's like a bunch of walker roots or whatever, right? And by default with the procedural generation, you're largely going to get things that are kind of randomly interspersed, unless you do a bunch of work to try to make those clusters happen. But at the same time, since the world kind of just goes on infinitely in all directions, then the player has a lot more open space to navigate through, and they may end up not encountering those clusters, for a long time. It's just kind of on accident.
It's really hard to make something that is both rare and definitely discoverable, right?
Yes.
When you're doing like procedural, large scale stuff, because you could just never stumble across it.
Yeah, if it's rare enough, But then when it comes to a handcrafted world, the rarest thing in the world is something that there's one of, right? Like that's as rare as it could get. Well, if you put one of something just at a completely random location in an infinite procedural world, almost nobody's going to see it, right?
Or the only way to see it is to make sure it gets seen, is to guarantee that they can get there, which means a new mechanism
player there.
Yeah, that just sends them to that spot directly.
Yeah. So what you can do instead with the handcrafted world is the handcrafted world is way smaller, but every inch of it is deliberate and interesting. And so, for example, you may have this one rare item and you may say, you know what? I want this item to be kind of like way off in the distance in a cave that is just filled with these like aggressive kinds of creatures. And also like the player will have to build a bridge to get to this little island to get there, and you kind of think about these scenarios of almost like, it's like obstacles that the player will have to go through, and the kind of experience that they would have to do to sort of like overcome those challenges to acquire that thing, versus, in a totally random world, it's like, it's just going to be somewhere, just kind of wherever it is. And that's uninteresting, which means that you tend to not do things like that in a procedural world, right? You end up with just like, it's all about just numbers, or like rates. So instead of there being one really interesting thing that has a really interesting experience that's wrapped up in it, instead you'll think, okay, well, I want this particular item to be kind of hard to get, so I'll just reduce its spawn rate, right? And sometimes when the player finds it, maybe it'll have some stuff around it that's a little more challenging, but other times they'll come across that thing and it's just kind of there out in the open, right? So I think like the shrines are kind of an interesting example in the original Crashlands, which were the little like
Diablo style, like
temporary
random
buff stations,
temporary
basically.
Yeah, they're like these kind of weird crystalline structures that when you'd hit them, you'd get you can like one shot everything that you harvest for the next like minute, or your fishing is boosted, or you do like triple damage or whatever, right? So those shrines were really cool, right? But in all cases, they're just like there. They're just sitting there out in the open. And there was nothing you had to really do to gain the benefit of them other than just walk up to it and slap it, right? So in a design space, we can actually put the shrine into an area that is more visually interesting and has like a lot more cool stuff going on. And also there could be something that the player has to do to get to that shrine that we've actually thought about, which means we can make the benefit of that shrine bigger.
Yeah.
Because we can make that thing more special, right? As opposed to it just being kind of like a thing that you can just reuse and just walk into
and
and
it's not just
get your buff.
Yeah, it's not just a one or the other either, right? Because like there's no reason why we couldn't have handcrafted like the area around shrines and then randomly placed those, right? But the point of all of this is that any part of it that's not like hand designed with a specific experience in mind has to then be tuned to allow for this huge variation in when and how and where the player experiences the thing. And so
and how many times they
experience it, all that, right?
Yeah.
Or you have to tune other systems to control for those things in some way, right? Which is another kind of a, hand tuning, right? Is like deciding this is actually supposed to happen in this way, therefore, X, right? And so whether you're doing lots of like really careful sort of edge case creation, in essence, in your procedural generation or hand building everything, like either way, like that's how you get the stuff that feels like an intentional designed experience.
Right. Yeah, I think the guiding philosophy difference basically comes down to moving from a place where the player is wandering around to discover things to one where the player can explore a space to discover things, if that makes sense. Because, in the original, it's like we just couldn't. I think there's like 12, there's at least 12 unique sort of strange outposts in each biome that aren't tied to any quests or anything like that. And
there's a weird little spot.
Nobody finds them. And they also had to be limited. Because we knew this was going to be a problem, we put them like within the central kind of most central ring of the map. I don't think they go more than like maybe 200 tiles out or something like that, because that's like the space people tend to backtread over the most. And even so, like nobody finds them.
Yeah, but still like a 200 tile radius, that's like 400 tiles across. 400 by 400 is 160,000 grid spaces, right? Like it's a huge area. Like, this is the problem with areas, right? And we also had so many conversations in the earlier days of working on Crashlands 2 about exploration, because we kept using that word to talk about things, but it became obvious over time that we didn't actually have a concrete definition of what exploration really is. Because you could say it, and I think like No Man's Sky is such an interesting example of a problematic definition of exploration, right? Because it was almost branded as like you're out there as an explorer, like going to all these new planets where like nobody's ever been before, and you're like naming things or like discovering all these things. But exploring an infinite space feels like nothing.
It's wandering. It's not exploring.
You're just wandering around because there's no completionness aspect.
I think you have to have edges.
Fully explore.
Yeah. I think you have to have edges for exploration to be possible, where I can see how much of the space I have seen so far, and I can then say, I'm going to go over there because I haven't seen what's over there yet, and have a guess that it's going to be meaningfully different from other stuff that I've seen. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and if you go in the case of No Man's Sky, if you go from planet to planet, or in the case of Crashlands, if you just go from like this part of the biome to this other part of the biome, if the stuff that you see is largely following the same pattern and just kind of doing the same stuff, and it doesn't necessarily matter that you're over here versus over there,
that's
right? Then you don't really feel like you've explored. You've just walked. You've just wandered. You've just moved, but you haven't explored and found something that was worth finding, right?
Yeah.
And it's still, that was a big part of it.
Yeah, and I think there's the nuance here is it still isn't about handcrafted versus procedural as like categories. It's about how the decisions are made about what the player experience is going to be and how that fits with the environment that's being created. Because you could take a game like, let's say, Terraria, right, which procedurally generated, which I would describe as the experience of it feels like exploring, right? It doesn't feel like wandering, right? But that's because there are very distinct types of locations, right? Yeah. And like if you're at a really big map, they are repeating. And in that case, like when you're in one place, well, that might as well be a different place. And that's true. Like, and that's the part that starts to get boring, right? but they have edges to things, and the world changes over time as you like progress, right? So like asteroids come and land, or you kill the boss and you unlock hard mode, and also these
There's enough unique
in the biomes,
spaces, with unique rewards that it ends up working great. Yeah, but I think when you actually pair the reality though is that when we looked at Crashlands, we were like, oh, okay, actually doing a narrative driven game, it actually makes a lot more sense to do it in a handcrafted world because the level of control you have over what's happening where and the expressiveness over what's happening where that's sort of required. And when you're looking at the like a replay experience like Terraria, you can really replay that in a pretty different way, like many times, because the sense of like exploration and whatever else is basically what the game is all about, right? But when you have, as soon as you layer story in, there's like a bit of a soft limit on like the number of replays at any given. It's not like a roguelike where you want people to just like the replay is the game, right? The replay would be if you just were super into it and you want to try a different kind of tack, then you can do a replay. But once you kind of bind all those things together, you're like, okay, so probably the vast majority of players are going to go through this space once. It has a lot of narrative stuff that we want to be able to very specifically do and specifically guide players to or allow them to discover, as opposed to sort of wander aimlessly potentially into. Then I think it starts making more sense to kind of just
I think it's about how designed do you want the player experience to be, and I think that's where you get into handcrafted versus procedural, because you can still using procedural stuff, and it's always a gradient, right? Because there's always both parts involved. But it gets, the more you lean into procedural, the harder it becomes to create a particular experience.
Yes,
and the more you lean into the other one, but they are both very hard to pull off along their domains. And I also think that for, at least from the outside, since I don't do any of the game dev work, it also just feels way more intimidating to have a handcrafted designed world, because it feels like when you're like coming up with like levers you can pull, and you can like pull it and like the whole experience changes, it feels like there's a sense of like cognitive load that is a little less intense, where it's like, oh, I don't like how this feels, I'm just going to yank this lever a bit, right? Versus I'm trying to tell this story, it needs to kind of unfold in this way, and that means I need to talk to this character, so this character should be like over here, but I want them to also have this weapon when they get there or whatever, but I don't want it to feel linear, I want it to feel like interesting. So as you start to design all these things together, it becomes a circular, like really circular, complex problem. And again, they always are, but you have to like make every specific decision, right, about how that unfolds, and that to me seems just way more intimidating.
Yeah, I think it, for whatever reason, it did to me also for a very long time while we were getting started on stuff. But then actually, once we broke out of trying to do things procedurally, and it kind of went fully into saying, okay, no, like every space, the goal of every space is to have a slightly different feel and all this other stuff. Then actually it became very fun, because there was stuff that I couldn't actually, there's, like we were talking about earlier, there's experiences I could not get generated, even though I had the stuff technically there, right? But if I was just hitting, we had to basically repopulate resources button you could hit, and it would procedurally put resources all over the map according to various ratios and stuff like that. And it was great for getting a baseline of stuff down, but not great for actually like from a gameplay experience in a way, worldly experiential sort of standpoint. And so even though now it's like, you got to put each rock down or whatever else. It's actually way easier to think about once you zoom up one level and you're like, okay, but experientially, like what's this particular space about? And then you can just deliver on that within like 20, 30 minutes now with the world editor, as opposed to before it was like, okay, if I want to get this kind of experience, I can't actually deliver it. And so I think that's been the big difference for me, is as soon as we crossed that bridge and I really kind of got into it a little bit, I was like, oh, okay, it very much is like Levelhead, where you pick a thing you're trying to do in a particular space, a mood, what do you want the player to be feeling while they're in there or whatever else, and then you kind of craft it such that you think it'll generate that, have someone play it, watch them, and then if it unfolds the way you think it will, then you're good to go. You can spice it up.
Yeah, well, and this is why level design is its own whole ass profession in the games industry, right? Is because that as a skill set and like the experience required to like figure out how to do all this kind of stuff is just this enormous collection of complex, interesting problems that you have to be able to like reason about and like figure out how do you use the tools that you have to imagine and then construct these kinds of experiences and then see if it actually is delivering that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it has been interesting to see how we've just moved further and further away from procedural stuff as our vision for what we want the game experience to be has gotten more clear, because we have very specific things that we want to have happen, or specific places we want to represent in the world. And you just, randomness just isn't gonna get you there. Yeah. So at a certain point, you just gotta intervene and just just do it the old-fashioned way. Just do it yourself, right? All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DeCoster for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.